So I want to tell a dream here, curious in a number of respects. The most curious aspect to me is that it seems to lay out chronologically in the dream how the patient's treatment went over a period of many months in the same fashion. This was a patient, someone I had known earlier in another city where I had lived before coming to Portland to study Chinese medicine. And at the time she had this dream, she did not know that she was suffering from chronic Lyme disease. She was in very desperate condition. She was in so much pain. She couldn't sleep at night at all. Her emotions were all over the place. To begin with, this patient, the most horrific stories in her life of trauma that I think of any patient I've worked with. So a lot of trauma already in the background, and then all the wandering pain that is so typical of chronic Lyme disease. So sometimes neuropathic pain, sometimes other types of pain, sometimes unremitting headaches, malaise, inability to eat, or if you do eat, inability to digest, can't sleep, emotions like on a roller coaster. This was the typical picture for her for many months. And no clear diagnosis. She had previously, well actually not just previously, she had a job in a doctor's office and she was basically unable to work other than sporadic hours here and there. She was just scheduling appointments was her job. But certainly she knew her way around the medical system, and she had been to a number of doctors to try to understand what was going on with her. So that's the context in which this dream appears. And I hadn't even seen her as a patient. This was just in a phone conversation. She had heard from someone in that city where I used to live that I was treating quite a few chronic Lyme patients. So she reached out by phone, and I asked, anything happened dream-wise? And so this is a dream from a few months before our conversation. So I'll tell it in first person, present tense, as she told it. That's always how Jeremy Taylor asks patients to relate the dream. First person, present tense. I'm in a rowboat with my mother, a wooden rowboat. It's a narrow river in a jungle. In fact, the foliage rises so sharply at the sides of the river that it's almost as if in a canyon. But those aren't rocks, they are trees that go sharply up. And I come around a bend in the river, and then I can see a little native village on a rise, a short bit above the river level. I put into the shore there. At this point in the dream, my mother disappears from the dream images. I walk alone up into the native village. I'm met there by a witch doctor. He looks every bit the caricature of a witch doctor with a bone through the nose and kind of a skirt of reeds, a bare upper body. And I understand that the hut right there to the side is his hut. And I can see through the doorway that there are many wicker baskets, big ones, with lids on them. I walk right into his hut and I reach into a wicker basket and I pull out a snake. It's a venomous snake. And I bite its head off. That's the end of the dream. Well, this patient was for many, many years a very active member of animal rescue. Her experience of this dream was traumatic. She thought, oh, I'm not myself any longer. I never would hurt an animal. She was taking in always the strangest animals and nursing them for months or years until there'd be a place for it to go. And the idea that she would grab this snake and bite its head off was, to her, this was qualified as a nightmare. And that something was deeply wrong with her. She didn't see a different side of the symbols that I'm going to talk about. Well, first of all, there's a mother and a child that should say something to us in 5-element terms, right? So if we're going around the 5-element wheel, they're going to be adjacent to one another, like spleen and lung, or lung and kidney, liver, that sort of thing. So maybe something like that is at play here, and that we could find something to tease out. Well, we've got water. That's always a question. Obviously, in a dream, essentially, if it's salt water, it's going to go with the water element. But the water element is not the only part of the fluid cycle, fluid physiology, in terms of Chinese medicine. For instance, we call the lung the upper source of water, right? Misting, that whole function. So this was fresh water. It's a river in a jungle. So I'm thinking, is that lung? Maybe. These are all held as ideas. And then the image, narrow, sharp sides going up. This is the very image of constraint. And that this is so green. The sides are just foliage. So I thought, oh, this sounds like what we call liver qi constraint. And the river is rather narrow there. And dreams are often full of word plays, puns. And in her waking life experience, she doesn't know where to go in the medical system. She doesn't know which doctor to go to. Different, right? W-H-I-C-H and W-I-T-C-H. That happens all the time, and sometimes those word plays involve foreign languages as well, I'll point out. Well, that's interesting to me that the doctor here that she encounters, he's not practicing Chinese medicine, but he is practicing medicine close to the earth, right? The way this native tribe is living there. Now let's talk about this idea with the snake. Well, snake, in the way Heiner Fruhoff, who is a noted sinologist and clinician, expert in Chinese medicine, the way he teaches the archetypal animals, that the snake is the archetypal animal for the spleen organ network. And this goes with the first hexagram of the I Ching. In the first hexagram, all 6 lines are yang. This is pure yang. Well, what part of the snake does she deal with? Does she bite? The head. Well, the head is all yang. So the most yang hexagram, the most yang possible animal, and the most yang part of that animal, and it's toxic. That should sound to you, if you're thinking herbally, like aconite, right? The king of the 100 herbs, that sort of idea. Or maybe they say 1,000, I can't recall the saying. So when I went back to the thinking about the mother-child, because the snake is spleen, because I felt like the fresh water was probably lung, right? Lung is the upper source of water. And she had such a tremendous background in trauma. And even to hear her voice message on her phone, it's not that way now, by the way, after a lot of treatment. But initially, when you heard her voice message on her phone, it just sounded like she was about to cry, no matter how many times she re-recorded it. So the lung, the grief, the river, so the mother-child, I thought, well, initially I'm going to understand that provisionally as lung and spleen. Now we had other things. We had the bone in the nose and the aconite can connect with kidney as well. And that played out over time. So in this dream, it starts chronologically with this liver constraint. And she started in the Chai-Hu family of formulas, Chai-Hu Ja Longu Mu Li. And she was on that for 3 months, unmodified. It was amazing the change that occurred in her emotional state. Once she was more stable emotionally, then other things could start to come in. And but it didn't change to an aconite formula for close to a year, I think it was. And when the aconite was brought in, and maybe I could have brought it in sooner, I knew from the dream I had to get there at some point. And I think it was a kind of a complicated formula. The Qian Yang Dan, which is a fire spirit formula, it's a little bit like Fu Zi Li Zhongwan, take out the Baiju and put in Shaoren instead. That's the kind of version of Qian Yang Dan that I'm used to using. Sometimes a yin component will come in with like, turtle shell or something like that. A little bit. Yeah, but I still was including some gu herbs. Gu, if you're unfamiliar with gu syndrome, if you just Google it, gu is G-U, and put Heiner Fruehoff's name on it, you'll get there. That's the whole basis of his understanding of how to treat chronic Lyme disease and other chronic parasitic infections. So this beginning of the dream yielded a certain formula. It lasted for a while. Then we went to a standard gu approach, and then we got well enough, the patient got healed enough so that an aconite formula now made sense. Once she was on the aconite formula, within a month or 6 weeks, she bought a horse again. She started to garden up to 6 hours a day in her backyard, which is an amazing garden. And then she got a second horse, and then she started to teach underprivileged kids how to ride, and she started hosting spiritual book groups. It was really astonishing how much came together, considering that she could barely get out of her recliner all day long because the pain was so incapacitating, and she wasn't sleeping hardly at all at night. And that this was all basically laid out as a roadmap for me in the dream. Start with treating the liver constraint, then move into addressing the next pieces, this going into eventually this aconite piece. I still am in contact with this patient, and still on a different kind of aconite formula now. This, I don't know that I would have ended up with this treatment approach had I not had the dream to guide me, because my more standard approach would have been to start right away with the Gu syndrome kinds of formulas, like the Suhatang, Jiajian Suhatang, those sorts of things. And I think starting with the Chai-Hu Ja Longu Mu Li, that was straight out of the dream. And I don't think I would have gotten there on my own, because I wasn't used to using those kinds of formulas with Lyme patients at that time. So this just gives an example of what can be there to be discovered in a dream. There's more that could be teased out of this dream. I've told this to any number of people now, and I used it as an example. I've actually got hundreds of patient dreams saved, and they're just astonishing in so many ways. Some of them very clear Sanjiao dreams. In fact, maybe I'll record another video and put that up just so you see that it's not all organ networks and 5-phase and yin-yang, but the Sanjiao comes up. You'd be surprised the frequency of dreams that contain 3-story buildings. And then you've got lower jiao, middle jiao, upper jiao. But here, what's interesting to me is that this lays it out chronologically. You're going to start with this family of formulas, and then you're going to move on. Where you're going to get ultimately is to the aconite formulas. And that was just the magic of it. Thanks for your listening, and good luck with your dream work.